And okay, hey, I'm Bill Roman. Thanks for coming to Guy Shrink. And my guest today is Jordan Keefe, who's a good friend. And we've got a lot to talk about. As always, Jordan, I'd like to begin the conversation with, well, what keeps you awake at night? And love to hear from you.
No, it's a good question. I know we talked about this and kind of laughed because I fall asleep so incredibly quick that nothing keeps me up. Nothing, is causing my brain to not be able to sleep. But getting to the heart of your question of kind of what drives me, what pisses me off kind of thing. And, I think for me, as I've thought about this a lot, it really is men who are struggling with addictions like that, because I was there and because I know the pain and the frustration. That is something that really does kind of irk me, which is something I'm working to kind of help contribute to play a part of, to help them understand that they're not alone, they're not lost, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it certainly does.
That's the most frustrating thing for me.
You willing to say a little bit more about addictions in general, or maybe particularly what was going on for you?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to share that. So for me, it was 3 years ago or so, and I'd battled with a pornography addiction from the time I was 14 until 26, 27. And it was one of those things where, I was a good Christian boy growing up. Like, I went to church 16 times a week and was in youth group and college groups and you name it, I was a part of it. And the entire time I really struggled with pornography. And it was one of those things where, I would want to quit all the time. Every time I used it, anytime I looked at it, I would want to quit as soon as I was done, and then give it a couple days, a couple weeks, etc. And then that urge kind of would set back in and I'd return back to it and then go to church the next day and just feel as guilty as any human being can possibly feel. And then I would get motivated and say, I'm going to stop. And, that cycle would just perpetuate. And sometimes it would last for longer. Sometimes it'd be a month, 2 months, 6 months, 9 months where I wouldn't look at it. And all of a sudden, snap, it would just hit like a ton of bricks out of nowhere. And when you take that into a marriage, it can definitely cause issues, especially when you combine it with kind of a hiding nature where I wouldn't want to necessarily confess right away if I did screw up. So I'd hold it in, and I started getting sick, and just all these crazy things were happening. But eventually I reached a point where, we went to this personal development conference. I had a chance to confess it in kind of one of the safest places you could at one of these conferences, where they're telling you, forgiveness is so healthy. You need to forgive people that have wronged you. So this is my chance. I'm there with my wife to kind of confess this. And I just didn't do it, just kind of cowered out of it. And it was very humiliating, very frustrating. So I kind of kept it all inside again, which just led to more stress, more anxiety, more you name it. And then eventually I finally had the courage to confess. We went back to another conference, had the same experience, and I confessed some of the things that I had done, but I only confessed like half of it. I had the perfect opportunity again to come perfectly clean, didn't do it, felt stupid, felt ashamed, etc. Lived with that for another 2 weeks, and then finally confessed the full thing. She was unbelievably angry, which rightfully so, right? It was my actions, it was my stupidity, etc. And it was kind of an ultimatum of, you either figure this out or we're done. And for me in that position, I think a lot of guys can relate to this. When it comes to that pornography addiction, it's not even something that you want to do. You just continue to return back to it. So it was this feeling of like, if your muscle were to twitch or your eye starts twitching, if you ever have that just on a random day, all of a sudden your eye starts twitching. And if your spouse was like, you either stop your eye twitching or we're through, we're done. That was kind of that feeling of like, I can't even control it. It's not something that I want to do. It's just something that happens out of nowhere. And so I had this completely lost feeling. And so that was when I, started working with you, which led to me understanding more of kind of where it came from, why it would show up in random times, good or bad, which then, led to me doing more research, more understanding, more learning about myself, which kind of started me on this kind of wild journey, if you will. And it's now been 3 years and I've been clean from pornography, and I actually have a understanding now. So it's not so much of a white knuckle experience where you're just kind of hanging onto the steering wheel praying that you don't fly off the side of the road. So that has been my journey in a nutshell, if you will, to this point. So,
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
one of the things about addictions in general, it's a persistent behavior that continues despite negative or adverse ramifications
Yeah.
or results.
Yep.
And we're scratching our head going, why do I do that?
Yeah.
I think I may have said in a previous conversation with you when I was younger
Yeah.
that you had to make a special effort to get pornography.
Yes.
You had to go downtown to some sleazy bookstore down in the basement
Yeah.
kind of thing. And it was a chore.
Yeah.
And then you kind of looked when you come out the door to make sure nobody was looking, even though it was a seedy part of town.
Mm-hmm.
But now, heck, I just pull out my phone and go in the bathroom.
Yep. That's it.
And
It's easy.
The cues between the cue and the acting out, there's nothing in between.
Yeah. No.
Whereas at one time it was a big effort.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was a big effort. So what did you think? What do you think was probably one of the most helpful or the more helpful things that gave you personal insight into saying, I don't need to do this today, then or any longer?
Yeah. No, I think it was something that came out during one of our sessions, but we really identified, for me, it was my emotions, right? Which, with all the studying and the research I've done since then, I've learned even more about it. But, we talked about, because there were even days where it would be a great day where, normally you'd think I just use pornography to kind of get out of the negative emotions, which did happen at times where I'd have a sucky day and would then look at pornography. But there are also times where, I get 100% on a test. Like, that's one vivid memory that I have of, I was in college, hadn't really prepared for a test, thought I had bombed it. And then, a couple days later, get the test back. I literally got like a 95%, and I was over the moon. I was so excited. And this was during a period of my life where I was trying to quit pornography, not look at it anymore, not use it, not masturbate, etc. And I went back to my dorm room and, within 20 minutes of receiving that news, looked at pornography. And it was one of those moments where I just would scratch my head like, why did I do that? And that was when, after, this was years before, but when you and I were talking, understanding it's not necessarily that good things or bad things happen and you have to get out of them, but it's not being able to process them fully. And that for me was a really big eye opener. And that kind of started that journey of me being more open with what I'm feeling, with, what I'm going through, with my wife who, is with me through thick and thin. She wants to know what's good, what's bad, etc. But I would normally hold that stuff in, let it fester, let it build. If something pissed me off at work or with a person that I know, or, someone cut me off, like those kind of things that you hold inside, that is what can ultimately lead to, you going back to something that your brain knows will help you feel better. And that was, for me, pornography. For other people, it's drugs, it's alcohol, it's whatever. But my drug of choice was pornography. So that was definitely the biggest eye-opener. Just being aware of, okay, I can experience things, I can feel things, positive and negative, and not have to return back to pornography to process it, to deal with it, to get myself in a place where I feel okay again. So
I call that self-soothing.
Yeah.
Various ways to self-soothe. We might use pornography to reward ourselves.
Yeah.
I got 100 on a test.
Yep.
We might use pornography to feel better after something negative has happened. I find a big one is that I'm bored and don't know what else to do.
Yeah.
So boredom
Yes.
is a big.
Yeah.
Of course, someone once said, if you're a boring person, boredom is going to be your companion.
Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting idea.
Yeah. Definitely.
So one of the things I've found about pornography, and I've used this in working with some clients, is sometimes it's difficult to go cold turkey. I'm never going to do it again, whatever.
Yeah.
And so incrementally, I like the words of AA, a day at a time. Let's work with a day at a time kind of thing. But one of the things I found to be interesting is to say to a client, have you ever thought about scheduling your use of pornography? Admit that you're going to use it.
Yeah.
And then say, okay, on Tuesday afternoons between 1 and 1:10,
Yeah.
I'll watch my pornography. And if it's
Interesting.
Thursday afternoon, too bad, you've already missed. You have to wait till next week, kind of thing. Or
Yeah.
say I can use it every day for 10 minutes or 5, whatever.
Yeah.
The idea is admit that you're going to use it.
Yeah.
That's the first step.
Yeah.
Because if you
Yeah.
aren't going to go there, you're going to constantly feel in the emotional quicksand of negativity
Yeah.
that you're a terrible person.
Yeah.
As you and I have talked before.
For sure.
And see if you can see if this scheduling idea might work as
Yeah.
a measure to move towards abstention.
For sure.
And that gives you some time to do some other work about, can I sit in the negativity? How long can I sit in this negativity or this good feeling
Yeah.
or whatever it is without the need to soothe? I listened to James Clear, and is it BJ Fogg that's done the work on habits, I think?
I know James Clear did the Atomic Habits, I believe. Yeah.
Clear talks about between the cue and the acting out, putting something to detour the process. And I think he's made a comment once about one of the most effective ways to stop smoking was to say, after I eat, I'm going to smoke. After I eat, I'm going to brush my teeth, and then I'll smoke. And he said the people were able to stop smoking quicker by inserting the brushing of the teeth.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
I'm going to use pornography today, but after I come home to my dorm room.
Yeah.
But before I use the pornography, I'm going to do 50 push-ups.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a cold shower. I'm going to run a half a mile.
Yeah.
And it's putting something in between the cue and the acting out might be an interesting way to find some relief there without going to the usual way of self-soothing.
Yeah. Well, and I like what you said about scheduling it, right? Because I think in so many times we do things without recognizing like the effect. Like a lot of things that you and I worked on, I put into practice without understanding the like what it's actually doing at the root. And as so many things are so powerful like that, but with your scheduling concept, right? What that's really doing is it's letting your client, it's letting you turn almost towards it and sort of now begin to experience the urge, the temptation, the triggers that you're experiencing. Because now it's okay to look at pornography at 1 o'clock on Tuesday because that's my schedule, right? So I'm going to experience all these things leading up to Tuesday. I'm going to feel all these things. And now you're actually more open to like, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? Instead of, oh my gosh, here comes that trigger again. I can feel it. I can feel that pit in my stomach. I gotta do something. I have to figure it out. And then you end up just turning right back to pornography because you want to avoid that trigger. You want to avoid that urge because you know what it means. It means you're going to screw up. It means you're going to be a failure again. You're going to let down your spouse. But now, like with the scheduling, you're turning towards it and can now see it for what it is and begin to learn even more about where it came from, what it's doing to you, what it's doing to your mind, etc. And that was one of those things for me where just processing the emotions kind of allowed me to see it for what it was and not be afraid of what I was feeling. So
gives me a chance to recognize the emotion that's present.
Yeah.
And to welcome it.
Yeah.
It's not like, well, here's my good friend pornography, but here's my good friend this trigger of inadequacy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And actually say, my good friend in inadequacy, and be able to say, I don't need to play with you today.
Yeah.
Now, it takes some time to back out of all of this stuff. What you're doing is you're slowing down the process of using.
Yep. And I remember when we worked together, you know, one thing you told me was with Winston Churchill, his black dog, right? Oh, here comes the black dog again. And it's such an interesting analogy because it separates you from the thoughts that you're holding about that addiction, right? If it's pornography, oh, here comes, I know what these feelings are. I know what these sensations are. Here comes the black dog. It doesn't mean that you have to give into that, but now you're aware, okay, I know what these things represent. Thank you for coming. And one of the things that I work with my clients on is actually thanking the urge for coming, because the only reason it's coming is to, in your mind, keep you alive, right? You want to feel better as a human. You want to move towards nutrients and away from toxins or things that hurt you. And so this urge that's coming is just coming because you've trained your brain that this is how I'm going to feel better. And so if you can begin to see it for that, you can thank it for showing up and, I appreciate it. I'm glad that you're here to try to make me feel better. I appreciate it. I don't necessarily need to pet you right now because you're just my little black dog. So go sit in the corner because I have stuff to get done.
Yeah, go lay down.
Yeah, go lay down. And that was a very powerful realization for me, is kind of separating that from my core identity. So that was a very, very helpful piece of the whole puzzle for sure.
I'm glad to hear that. That really is a very powerful intervention, personal intervention.
Yeah.
To be able to name that distress, whatever it is,
For sure.
claim it as a friend, and then be able to say, okay, you're here for a minute. I can entertain you for a minute.
Yep.
And then I got a whole bunch of other stuff to do.
Yep.
And go over there and lay down.
Yeah.
It'll come back, of course, but you're training your brain to manage it differently.
Yep.
Is what you're doing.
Yeah.
And like lifting weights, like 250-pound bench press. The first time is going to be, it's going to feel weird.
It's going to crush you. Yeah.
It's going to hurt like hell afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
And then my conclusion is I'm never doing that again.
Yep.
And then you're the coach and you say to me, well, we're going to do this again tomorrow and we're going to do it twice.
Yeah.
Because the idea is building that emotional muscle of I don't need to do this activity that isn't helpful for me.
Yeah.
And it takes just practice is what it does.
Yeah.
I think.
Agreed.
Well, having had I'm going to say, an emotional revelation, victory here. How does this get played out in your everyday life then? I know you've had some interesting journey. You're an engineer, and where that's taken you in your life, and now I know you and your wife are doing something differently, which is really kind of cool. So could you share a little bit about what's happened since our work?
Yeah, no, definitely. Even as I went through that journey, one of the most, I think, fruitful things that came out of it was as you kind of exit an addiction, right? Not necessarily all habits, but just leaving the pornography addiction in the dust allowed me to become someone who lived with more integrity. I could look people in the eyes. I could be more intimate with my wife. I didn't have to hide things. I didn't have to, hide behind this shame blanket, if you will, feeling guilty all the time, going to work. Like there's just a lot more genuineness, if that makes sense, that comes as a result of breaking free from that. And I know what it's like to not live with that, and it's miserable. But coming out of that, I started to kind of see life more simply, I guess you could say it. And, I was an engineer by training. I'm a chemical engineer from the University of Toledo. I loved the program, loved what I learned. That is how my brain processes. I'm a process-driven human being. It's just one of the things about me. I'm very logical. I love programming computers. I started out as a chemical engineer, morphed into this sort of software developer, working with businesses. And that was kind of my identity, right? And I know we talked when we got some coffee that, I had this kind of weird experience that led me to kind of redefine myself. And there were some factors that went into that, but ultimately it was just this moment of, why am I doing what I'm doing if I'm not truly loving it? Maybe it's time to mix it up a little bit. And, we talked about the pressure of, needing to know what you do so that if someone asks you that you don't know, you can give them a simple answer. And I've even thought more about that. And a lot of that, I think, comes from this idea of the only reason they're asking you is so they know where to respect you, right? Where to put you on their pedestal of, do I treat this guy like he's some hero, or can I just stomp all over him, right? And if you respond with an answer of, well, I'm a garbage collector, then they're probably like, oh, he's nothing, right? But if you're the CEO of a multi-million-dollar startup, then they're like, oh, wow, and there's a lot of pressure that comes along with that answer that you give them, when really they may not even care at all. They're just asking you because they're just asking you a question, right? And so that pressure, I think, is what kept me from branching out and doing something different, even though I may not have enjoyed what I was doing in the present moment. And not because it was hard or whatever, but the circumstances, the place I was at may not have suited, the things that I value as well as it could have. And so having the fear of leaving the company that you work for, starting something on your own, et cetera, there can be a lot of fears that hold you back. And that was something that I definitely experienced during that season.
Well, you said something, you said many good things here, but one that in particular is about finding finding some inner joy in what I do as not a profession, but more than a career, more than a job, maybe a calling. It's not about punching the clock. I'm often wonder when people say to me, "Well, I'm just this." Why would you just be just whatever it is?
Yeah.
It's a big deal what a person does with their life.
Yeah.
And I know that for you, you've made some decisions about that was a good gig.
Yeah.
But I'm looking for something more.
Yeah.
I'm looking for something greater than myself at this point. And so I'm seeing your movement as a young man to move from success to what I call significance, and bringing worth it to other people, which is really a phenomenal move, particularly for such a young guy as yourself. And so while I'm not a big fan of I reinvented myself, I would like, if you don't mind, talk a little bit about how is it that you decided to move in the direction that you have done, and how's that working for you?
No, it's been a really interesting journey, and you know the weirdest part for me is how it all started. Right, so I'm a life coach now. It still feels weird to say that because I'm so used to saying, "Oh, I work for a medical device company," or "I'm a software developer," or "I'm an engineer." Like it's just been such a core part of my identity for so long that's what I thought I always had to be. I didn't know, and I never challenged the thought of, can I be something else? But my wife she's a very bubbly individual. People flock to her. She just has that kind of magnetic personality. I don't necessarily have it to that level. And she's always been someone who wants to help people. She's wanted to be a coach for the longest time. She's coached people for the past 10 years, it seems like, just through life, through different circumstances, et cetera. She's the person that's there in your corner. So for her to go from what she was doing into being a life coach wasn't that big of a transition. It was still a big shift, but for her, it was like part of her, what I would call her core DNA. Like, she's always got people's backs. She's in their corner, fighting for them, wanting the best for them. I've been more just put me in the corporate setting. I'll manage projects. I'll get it from A to B, and we'll all be happier for it. That's been me. So she was the one who actually became a life coach first, and got registered through this awesome program to become a certified life coach. And so for me, I was super excited for her. That's your thing. Go do it. Love it. I've got your back. We'll support you through this. And she had this conference call or kind of webinar that she was a part of before her coaching program began, and she wanted me to listen to it. And I said, okay, whatever. I'll lay here. I had a pounding headache at the time, a super bad migraine, because I get weird caffeine migraines from time to time if I don't get the right amount, or whatever.
Better get the right amount of
Better
caffeine.
Better
get the right amount of coffee. I love it.
Exactly. So it was one of those days where I didn't get the right amount. So my head it feels like it's about to explode. I can barely open my eyes. I can't even look at the screen because it's so sensitive. So I'm just laying there in bed listening to this call, and it ends by them talking about the coaching program and some of the different things. I'm like, I'm so excited for my wife. Like, this is going to be such a great thing for her. And all of a sudden I heard this voice as I'm laying there that says, you need to do this. And it was like, no, like, you don't know who I am. Like, I'm the engineer. I'm the person who manages processes. I think in terms of if, then, when, else, et cetera, things like that. I'm not a life coach. I have no interest in this. And I had all this debate going on in my head, and the voice kept getting louder. Like, no, you need to do this. It's like, no, you don't understand. Like, this is not me. It's not, I don't want this. It's like, seriously, you need to do this. And it's like, okay, how about this? Because it's a pretty, it's not expensive. It's a large investment to become a coach through this program. And I had this thought of, you know what? If you can make the money appear, I'll do it. And at this point, I kind of realized this is not me in this debate. This is me with what I believe to be the Holy Spirit kind of nudging me in this direction, even though it's something that I'd never seen for myself or foresaw myself doing. So I'm having this debate. Fine, you bring the money in, I'll make it happen, and we'll go from there. And as I'm thinking this or having this debate, the voice that I hear says, how about you just jump and the net will appear? And which for me has always been a very scary concept. But as I was having this thought, there was somebody on this webinar who said the exact same thing, jump and the net will appear. And someone else said it like 2 minutes later after that. And it just kind of hit me like, whoa. And I started having these visions of me coaching people in businesses and coaching CEOs and these different leaders. And it was a very powerful experience. And I just started laughing. And, you know, when you have a pounding migraine, you don't want to laugh or do anything like that. But I started just laughing uncontrollably. And my wife, who's sitting next to me, is like, what's wrong with you?
I thought you were sick.
I thought you weren't feeling great. And I'm just cracking up. And I said, you're not going to believe this, but I'm doing this coaching program. And she got all excited and, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. I never thought that I would see the day. And so, yeah, I went through the coaching program, never, you know, not really having much experience in what we were learning, right? Learning that thoughts drive your feelings, which drive your actions, and those lead to your behaviors. Like all of these things are new concepts to me, right? But I'm starting to learn them, to digest them. I'm starting to coach people and starting to see the fruit that comes out of that. And it's been a very liberating experience for me. And in addition to that, the work that you have to do on yourself to get to a place where you can, you know, coach yourself through things. That's been one of the biggest transformations for me. Was I'd worked with a coach in the past, and she's phenomenal. I mean, she helped me more than I can ever fathom. Like same kind of similar role that you played in my life with pornography, she played with getting me further in business that I was building for myself with software and things like that, and getting over a lot of fears. So I had experienced that, but I'd never taken the opportunity to coach myself or to challenge myself if I was feeling stuck in a different area. And that's what this coaching program really focuses on is, you know, if you're going to take clients through something, if you're going to coach them through a belief that's holding them back, you better believe you have worked through that belief yourself or that fear yourself so that you can take them to the place where they can now feel that freedom, that liberation, that aha experience where they can now see it differently. And because they see it differently and think about it differently, they feel differently about it, they act differently, and now their result is a complete change from what they were experiencing before. So that's kind of been my journey into what I'm doing now. And, you know, the cool thing is with coaching, I get to kind of take that over into the addiction space, which is, you know, my favorite thing. It's what I said keeps me up at night, if you will, even though very sound sleeper over here. But it's fantastic to be able to see men get liberated from the addiction, to now see that they don't have to white knuckle it, that there's an actual reason that they're turning back to it, even though they feel like it's the same as when their eye twitches. It's involuntary, it's uncontrollable, it's just something that they do, it's a part of them. So that's been a very cool experience for me to now be able to turn around and kind of help the men that I know what they were feeling, what they were struggling with, etc.
That's really great. That's worked out for you.
Yeah.
Is working out for you really nicely.
Yeah.
Jordan, you said two things that I really think are worth underlining, and one has to do with the idea of self-management. What a concept.
Yeah.
There's a saying that you can't give away what you don't have.
Yep.
So
Definitely.
if you're going to coach people in this direction, you have to have got some credibility of having done some self-management work.
Yes.
And that's a lifelong endeavor.
Yeah, for sure.
Which I think many of us are afraid of.
Yeah.
And the second thing is you used the word nudge while you were watching that with that migraine headache.
Yeah.
Nudge. I like the word intuition. You and I have had a little conversation about this before, about your subconscious doing some work.
Yeah.
And you paid attention to that. There was a restlessness going on deep inside of you.
Yeah.
It wasn't like I hate my job,
Right.
but something was working on you inside of you. You became more cognizant of it. And maybe it took a migraine headache for you to be in bed and not doing anything to be able to pay attention to those nudges that happen. And I'm wondering what happens to those of us guys that stay awake at night, if that might be an invitation to pay attention to some nudging that might be going on inside of us. I'm going to use the word subconscious. our inner being, our psyche,
Yes.
that there's more to us than just the doing of a job or whatever.
Yeah.
We're mostly human doings as opposed to human beings. And that those times of nudges and intuitions are invitations to pay attention to becoming a deeper human being.
Yeah.
And that sounds like that's what's happened to you, that nudges are, that's a great word.
Yeah.
Some of us need a kick in the pants. I remember
Yes.
that William James in his book, On Psychology, says that some of us are once born. I mean, you kind of get it. All falls into place.
Yeah.
I've got several friends that, and then there's some of us are twice born, that we need to have hit a couple of times over the head with a 2x4.
Yes.
And I think what he was getting at was paying attention to these inner voices, these nudges, this intuition that's operative in all of us, and that could lead us into a deeper relationship with ourselves, which could also lead into a deeper relationship with other human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. And that nudge can feel scary because it's coming from a place that you don't fully understand. It's so easy to just shrink back into, that's not who I am. I shouldn't go in this direction because I'm an engineer. I'm a programmer. Like, those were some of the thoughts that I had to battle with was, okay, I understand that this nudge is sending me in this direction, but this is not, I have a lot of fear in this area. This is way for, how am I going to tell people what I do? It's not a simple answer anymore. It's not cut and dry. I'm a computer programmer. Oh, wow, he's really smart. That must be what that means. Right. And I had all these kind of negative stipulations or stereotypes around life coaches, right? They're all kind of flimsy and they're, soft people and they don't have success themselves. So why would I want to learn from somebody who doesn't have that? And that for me is something that I had to work through. And as one of the analogies that really I've digested a lot and have kind of put into practice myself is, you think about coaches in the NFL, in the English Premier League, right? These are some of the top coaches in the world. But if you ask them to play in a game, they would very likely be horrible. They're all old, they're all overweight, they're all out of shape, etc. And this concept of the coach has to be the perfect player, I think really is that stretch, especially when it comes to life coaching, because you're talking about someone who, if they know the tactics of the game, let's take the NFL, for example, if they know how to design plays, if they know how to read the other team's defense or their offense, and they can anticipate what's coming, if they know these strategies, these tactics, the ways to work with your players, etc., you're going to have an effective team. You're going to have a winning team, right? And as a life coach, I used to have this belief that, if they didn't have $10 million in the bank or have a smoking hot marriage, that I wouldn't want to learn from them. But when you get into these one-on-one sessions with coaches, you'll see that their skill set is actually pulling the truth out of you. It's pulling stuff that you already know what the right thing to do is, but you often are surrounded by your fears, like I was that night in bed of, this is not me. I'm not a life coach. This shouldn't go in this direction because it doesn't feel safe. When you start to sit one-on-one with them, you'll see that skill set is simply looking at the way you think. It's looking at the way you see the world. It's looking at your map, as a lot of people call it, that's been shaped by what you've experienced, what you've been exposed to. And when they can work with that and tweak it just a little bit, that's where the true growth and that freedom comes from. And that's what I experienced kind of that night, was just, I have all these fears, I have these phobias, but that nudge was strong enough, thank God, that this migraine rolled in. And, it's weird to say thank you to a migraine, but had that migraine not been there, I probably would have been distracted. I wouldn't have been paying attention. My thoughts would have been on something else, but not listening to that nudge that just said, you need to do this. You need to step up and go after it, because people are hurting. There's lots of people out there who are suffering, like myself. Like, I was in a job that pays $100,000 a year. Like, to the world's eyes, I should have been so content, so happy, so you name it, in the role that I had, but yet I was still struggling with this inner turmoil that led me ultimately to listen to the nudge and say, you know what, maybe it is time to mix it up. What's the worst that can happen? And that's really what ended up happening. So
Yeah, that listening to that inner turmoil,
yeah,
and seeing it as, what is this about?
Mm-hmm.
Not to get it to be quiet,
Right.
But what is this about, and what is this inviting me to do?
Yep.
Makes all the difference in the world.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Jordan, it's been a great conversation as always. I always enjoy talking with you. Do you have like a little elevator speech, maybe a one-liner bit of coaching for those of us that lay awake at night?
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you say that, because I've actually had a client. I've worked with a client who, one of the sessions that we worked on was he could not sleep. I mean, his schedule was he would try to go to sleep at 1 a.m. and couldn't do it. He would lay there till 4 or 5 in the morning, and then he'd have to get up at 6 and go back to his job. And it was a very miserable time of his life. And we worked with him, and his thought, I asked him what your thought is when you're about to go to bed. And his thought was actually, oh my God, I hope I can control it tonight. So in his mind, it's this like wild animal that maybe it'll behave, maybe it won't behave. And he really believed that wholeheartedly. So he'd lay down, and every night it would just start running with these rampant thoughts that would then turn negative because he's such a failure. He's, all these negative things were just beating him up, and he couldn't sleep. And so we just sat for a minute and kind of challenged that thought and looked at what that thought was producing, right? And it produced this anxiety. It produced a desire to not even lay down. He'd rather just go back to work because he knows he's not going to get to sleep. And so we began to move that thought and shift it from this ultra negative thought of, God, I hope I can control my brain tonight, to more of a neutral thought of, it's okay being me. Like, that was the thought that we started working with of, okay, as you're brushing your teeth, getting ready to go to bed, how about you just focus on the thought, it's okay being me, and just let your body do what it needs to do. And so he started to put that into practice, and he began to fall asleep earlier. And then that thought, the initial thought of, I hope I can control it, just kind of disappeared, right? It just began to be replaced with this thought of, it's okay being me. And he began to sleep better and better and better, and go to sleep earlier and earlier and earlier and faster. And that was a really cool experience to see that and see the immediate impact of, if you just shift a simple thought, the rest of what you're dealing with is going to shift as well, and you're going to start to see different results. So that is kind of just a taste of what can happen when you're actually open to challenging the way that you think and shifting it just ever so slightly.
Okay. So that little 1 minute message is, consider how you think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stop and think about how you think, just for a second. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Jordan. It's been great talking with you.
Likewise.
And, have a great day.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks.